Teen Caucus is very happy to have a panel of actually 2 young Democrats here today. And then I guess Mark Levine, we can call you an honorary young Democrat.
I refuse to age.
Yeah, so Trevor Southerland is the former executive director of the Virginia House Democrats, and he's also a young Democrat himself. He said, you have about 300 days left. And then Delegate Lashrecse Aird is a delegate from the 63rd district, which includes Chesterfield County. And then she's also the chairwoman of the 4th Congressional District Democratic Committee. And Delegate Mark Levine is just over in Northern Virginia in the 8th Congressional District. He's the delegate for the 45th Virginia House of Delegates District, which includes Alexandria, Arlington, and part of Fairfax County. So today we'll be discussing the redistricting amendment, which is a proposed amendment to the Virginia Constitution that would create a commission to redraw legislative districts. So not just Virginia's 11 congressional districts that we have, but also the 100 House of Delegates districts, and the 40 state Senate districts. And basically, why this causes so much controversy is the amendment takes the name of redistricting reform in vain. It's a wonderfully Republican idea that would maintain control for legislators to redraw their districts in ways that can keep their districts safe. So it's bad news for minority populations, bad news for Black and Brown communities, and it's bad news for young people, since there are no protections against political gerrymandering or racial gerrymandering. And that's, of course, what we're here to talk about today. So I guess I'll just let you guys answer first. You can talk with more detail about this than I can. What the redistricting amendment is.
Well, Matt, you said it so well. I feel like we could just turn off our cameras and go home, because you said it in about 30 seconds, what normally takes me 5 minutes to go through. So
I was literally thinking the same thing.
So thank you for that. The heart of what it does is it sets up a legislative commission led by the 4-party leaders. There's 16 people on the commission, but all of them are chosen by the 4-party leaders. It's 8 legislators and 8 what they call citizens, but the citizens could be the spouse of a party leader, the children of the party leader, their business partner, their close friends. So really it's like 4 party leaders and 12 window dressing, what Congressman Bobby Scott called lipstick on a pig. But those 16 would draw the district lines. And as you pointed out, Matt, there's no protections for communities of color, for Black Virginians, for language minorities. There's no requirement of geographic diversity, no age diversity. I know you young Democrats care about that. There's just none of that's in there. And that's not even the worst part, as you point out, because even if 14 members of the commission all agree to kill the whole thing, scrap it, throw it in the wastebasket, it's really just an advisory commission, given that any 2 legislators, 2 delegates, 2 senators can kill it, and then send it to the Virginia Supreme Court, which is a partisan Republican Supreme Court. It has 6 Republicans, 1 Democrat, and includes such luminaries as Ken Cuccinelli's right-hand man, the sister of a sitting Supreme Court, a sitting conservative senator, Republican senator, a former Republican senator, former Republican delegate. All these people were chosen by the old legislature, which was controlled by Republicans. So it's understandable that it has a Republican bent. And Virginia being one of only 2 states in the country where the legislature chooses the high court, you can actually have this really terrible revolving door where the court picks the legislature, which picks the court, which picks the legislature, which picks the court, and the governor can't be involved. No federal court can be involved. No other court can be involved. It's kind of a self-perpetuating problem where if we're gerrymandered out, we voters really won't have a say. I know you have other questions, but I'm gonna see if my friend Delegate Aird wants to add a couple things.
Sure, thanks, Mark. I think you both really have covered it. And so I think I wanna do 2 things. And first of all, Good afternoon, Young Dems, and just thank you so much for taking part of your Sunday and having this really important conversation with us. You know, I think for me, what I hope that you're talking about when you are discussing this amendment is representation, because ultimately that is what is at stake here. You know, as young Democrats, there are so many issues that are deeply important to you. And literally, the way our lines are drawn in the next 10 to 20 years, that will determine the type of issues we will be able to address and the type of representation that you will have, not just in your respective communities and your respective districts, but ultimately in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We have made so much progress with this with gaining the majority, and we have been able to really celebrate so many wins. And ultimately, if we do not get this right, that can lead the way to rolling back so many of the amazing accomplishments that we have. And so while talking about redistricting reform is not as sexy to the everyday person, talking about gun protections, talking about the environment, talking about LGBTQ rights, talking about education funding, all of those things that people care about, that's ultimately what this boils down to. And so when you hear us talking about the lack of protections that do not exist in the makeup of the commission, when you hear us talk about the fact that Black and brown people aren't guaranteed a seat at the table or to be protected in the map drawing process, this is why we are so passionate about what this amendment could lead to. And so it sounds as though you have really a broad understanding of the constitutional amendment and the way it is framed right now, and you know how the commission would be formed in the process. But I think we have to really go that step further in the home stretch and talk about the fact that if you are someone who has fought long and hard on these democratic issues, these principles and values that we have, those things that you care about are at risk. You know, we take for granted the fact that we have the majority right now, but God forbid, and I'm not going to say it, but if for any reason we lose that majority, this amendment becomes that much worse. And so I know it feels like a difficult decision for so many people to make because they have said they want to see redistricting reform. I can tell you, as someone whose district has been struck down personally because of racial gerrymandering, there's no one who wants to see redistricting reform more than me. But at the end of the day, that reform has to be right. And I believe that we can get it right, but it's going to take all of us. And so I would ask that you incorporate the risk of the spectrum of representation that can be lost here. And that my call to action for you, and then we can jump right into questions, is that I challenge you every day until election day or every other day to really post about this amendment, because we have so many people that still do not know this is on their ballot. If you have time, please go to your registrar's office where people are voting in person early, and try to inform as many people as you can about this amendment. Incorporate voting no into your talking points when you are phone banking, when you are lit dropping. Write a special note on your literature that you're dropping off. I mean, as much as you can, trying to make a new person aware of this amendment as you are doing your day-to-day GOTV and just informing voters. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yeah, and I just want to take a minute to commend all of you guys for being involved. I had a grandfather who was involved in politics when I was growing up, so I remember, doing political things at the age of 6 and 7. The first time I ever canvassed door to door, I was 12, and then I was involved in campaigns all through my teenage years. So it's good to see you guys involved and good to see you being here. And I'm probably going to steal one of the questions that I'm sure which was going to be asked, which is, why does this matter to teenagers? Why does Amendment 1 matter to teens? And the answer is really quite simple. In a little while, you're going to hear us talk about the issues with the amendment and how it's going to lessen Black and brown voices in the process. And whenever we talk about that, there's inevitably somebody that says, so you think Louise Lucas and Eileen Fillercorn aren't going to appoint any Black people to the commission? Is that what you think about them? And the answer is no. We know that today's Democratic Party will take that into account. We know that Eileen Fillercorn and Louise Lucas will take that into account when they are making appointments. But you know, you don't have to look that far in the past, especially if you're talking about redistricting. Go back and look at the House Democratic Caucus in Virginia in 1990, or even in 2000. Go back and tell them that our speaker is a Jewish woman and that our majority leader is an African-American woman, and let me know what they say. They would probably start laughing because they'd think you were telling the best joke they'd ever heard. So go in the future 30 years. I don't know what the Democratic Party is going to look like then. I can't guarantee to you what the 2031, 41, 51, 61, 71, 81 process is going to look like. I can tell you that it's going to matter a lot more to you than it is going to matter to most of the people that are especially elected officials or that are voters right now. And that's why it's important to you, because this constitutional amendment is there and it will be part of the process for your whole voting lives.
No, I think Trevor made a really great point. And I just want to put a fine point on that and say, when you think about, not to excuse the 9 in the House, but when you think about the members in the Senate that have supported this amendment and that has really caused so much confusion among the base about, well, why are they supporting it over here? And, you know, they're not supporting it over there. No disrespect to our senators, but in 2031, many of them won't be here, right? And it will be on you to clean up the mess that they made. And so we have to pour everything that we can into this right now, because I mean, literally what happens today will affect your tomorrow. And I want to make it easier for you. I don't want you to have to still be fighting the same battles that we are fighting right now, because then that means I didn't do my job, right? And so ultimately we are trying to prevent you from having that hardship in the future, and trying to just make the road a little less bumpy along the way.
It's really hard to change the Virginia Constitution. It requires the legislature to vote, then you have to have an election, then a new legislature votes, and then it goes to the people. And what that means is that if you get it wrong, it's really, really hard to take it out. Currently in our Virginia Constitution, sullying it, is the old Marshall Newman Amendment, which says that same-sex couples can't get married. That's in our Constitution. Now, I realize the United States Supreme Court said that same-sex couples can get married, but that court's changing too right now. And, you know, for all of us who mourn the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I don't know what the future will bring. But now we have a constitutional amendment in Virginia saying that if the US Supreme Court backs off, all these gay couples have to forcibly be divorced. It's in our Constitution. Now we're going to work to get rid of that. I'm going to put forward my own amendment. It'll take 21 and then an election and then 22. And then we Democrats have to win again in 22, because if we don't, that goes away. And then we'll go to the voters. But the point is this: it's hard to amend the Constitution. Every single person who supports this amendment, they all say it's flawed. None of them think it's perfect. None of them think it's the greatest thing. None of them think it was particularly well written. The best they can give you is, well, we think it's better than nothing. And obviously we think it's worse than nothing, and we can have that argument. But none of them think it's great. So we're going to permanently put in the Constitution, make it really hard to change this thing that's not so great. And if it leads, as I fear it might, to a Republican gerrymander, we can never get rid of it, right? Because if the Supreme Court helps the Republicans and they gerrymander it, and they're in control in 22 in the House of Delegates, and Lashrecse and I go back to being backbenchers, and all that progressive legislation that you loved gets repealed. If they're, you know, I mean, it's the idea that, well, we'll just accept it. You know, it's kind of, to me, it reminds me sort of a tattoo. You know, you may think a tattoo is a great idea when you're 16, and, you know, you put, I don't know, your favorite whatever group, and then it turns out that later on that group, I don't know, does something awful, and now you got to erase. I mean, you can't erase a tattoo. It's hard to do. So you should think carefully, really carefully, before you do something permanent. And that's what this is. It's virtually permanent.
And if I can also just talk a little bit about, so what if the amendment fails, right? Because that's also people's greatest fear. They worry about, if we don't get it this time, will we ever have another opportunity? And so, Delegate Levine has just talked a little bit about some of the efforts that he's already committed to taking. But I want to make sure you also understand that House Bill 1255 was passed during the 2020 session, and that legislation, and Delegate Levine loves to talk about this, so I'm going to be brief, but that legislation, it ultimately has banned racial, prison, and political gerrymandering. And so when you hear people talk about, well, do Democrats even really want this reform? We have already demonstrated that we want this reform. In fact, we have already made it illegal to gerrymander. And so when we get back into session in 2021, not only will that House Bill 1255 already be law and be in place, but I can guarantee you, if not Delegate Levine, likely Delegate Price or Simon, they're going to put in more legislation to establish an independent redistricting commission. And that would be truly independent, not with legislators, not with them controlling the process. And so we are not only committed to doing that, we already have House Bill 1255, but then we will begin to do the real work of relaying the ground for a real constitutional amendment that actually implements a prohibition against gerrymandering and actually is a true commission, and that it's something that Virginians and voters can be proud of.
So we've been trying to do the right thing pretty much all of your adult lives, longer actually. You know, some of these efforts go back decades. And I like to say, if you're running a 26-mile marathon and at mile 25, they say, okay, you ready to quit? You're like, no, it's just 1 mile more. I understand people are tired and they just want it done already. But if you do it wrong, it could take 25 years to fix. We can actually get it right. And some people misunderstand this. They don't understand we can get it right in 421. The law that Lashrecse talks about, HB 1255, Delegate Cia Price's law, is the law. And people are like, well, you know, we don't want the status quo where you can gerrymander. That was the status quo in 2019. It ain't the status quo now. The status quo in 2020 is it is illegal to gerrymander. This isn't a choice between the decades of the past and this amendment. This is a choice between a law that says we can't gerrymander and this amendment which says we can. So it's a step backwards. And a lot of people don't even know this law exists. So when you talk to people, make sure they know that we ban gerrymandering. And here's something else. Democrats, we mostly oppose this amendment. There are a few that support it, but all of us supported HB 1255. All of us are on record as not only opposed to gerrymandering, but actually passing a law to prohibit it. So that protection is in place. I agree with Delegate Aird. We can get an independent, nonpartisan citizens commission, what we've been fighting for all these decades. We can do it in 21, in time for 21. And then, because, you know, Trevor's right, we have to worry about the future. We're going to have to do a new constitutional amendment, one that does it right this time, one that includes 1255 in the text of the Constitution, one that includes an independent, nonpartisan citizens commission in the text of the Constitution. And we can get that done as soon as 2022. And then we're done. And then y'all can live the rest of your lives and not worry about this anymore. So, but I know you have questions, and we're not filibustering. So ask your questions, please.
Yeah, to talk a little bit more about the composition of the proposed commission. So it would be 8 legislators, then 8 people chosen by judges from a list of legislators. But the 8 legislators, are they House? Are they leadership, or are they chosen by leadership? So is it Elaine Fillercorn, or is it someone chosen by Elaine Fillercorn?
It's 2 chosen by the House Democratic leader, 2 chosen by the Senate Democratic leader, 2 chosen by either, because it's unclear because it wasn't well written, the House Republican leader or possibly the chair of the Republican political party. If you read it, it's actually inconsistent, which just tells you it wasn't really well drafted. But the idea is supposed to be 2 Democratic senators, 2 Republican senators, 2 Republican House members, 2 Democratic House members, 4 party lead. They're all chosen by party leaders. You're right, Matt, that the party leaders give a list, and judges also chosen by these party leaders winnow down the list. So you can pick, you know, your husband and your kids and your business partner, and the judges will choose which of them that they want. But in essence, it's all 4 chosen, all 16 are chosen by the party leaders. Eileen Fillercorn can appoint herself. She can appoint two of her closest friends in the legislature. She can appoint her lovely husband, Bob, and her lovely children. And I'm actually obviously not too worried about my speaker. I'm much more worried about the Republicans. But the heart of it is, I'm sorry, Matt, unless you know these people really well, you're not going to be able to apply.
And unless there are prohibitions written into the actual amendments, you can't assume that it won't happen.
Yeah, so the Senate Republican leader, Tommy Norman,
right,
who thinks he wants to require elementary schools, all elementary schools in Virginia, to have courses on guns, he would be choosing who is on this commission.
And not only would he be choosing them, but if he and the senator he chooses decides to scrap the commission, then it doesn't matter what the other 14 say. Tommy Norman says, yeah, forget that. I want my appointees on the Virginia Supreme Court to make all the decisions. And I don't care what the other 14 of you think. And that's, I would argue, even worse than this 16-member commission, which is already not great.
Yeah, I mean, that part really always gets me, because I'm one of those people, I think some of you are too. I like to watch a bunch of political dramas. Actually, during COVID, I just finished a Danish political drama because I'm weird. And I've never heard a vote come down where the speaker or the chair says, the ayes are 14, the nays are 2, the motion fails.
Have it. Yeah.
How is that possible? But under this amendment, that would be possible if it's the right 2 people.
That's what you call fuzzy math.
Yeah, that's some fuzzy math.
So we actually had, about a month ago, Delegate Marcus Simon, we had an event with him, and he talked about a little, we tried to keep it away from since it's a hot topic, but he talked a little bit about the alternative he proposed in the General Assembly. I asked this would be, Trevor Southerland would have the most information about this, but how did this pass the General Assembly, not once, but twice? I understand 2019 or 2018, but how in 2020?
Well, so it passed in 2019 and in 2020, and I'll give sort of the mechanics of it, and then I'm sure, especially my friend Delegate Aird has some comments about it. So in 2019, we were looking at something in 2018 and 2019, something weird happened. And that was that in the House of Delegates, which at one point had been a Republican supermajority, in 2015, we cut into that just to make it where they weren't a supermajority, but they were still a 66-34 majority, which is a sizable majority. They were down to 51-49. And it really should have been 50-50 or 51-49 for us, but that's a whole nother Zoom. So it was a 51-49 Republican majority. And for the first time in a long time, the Republican caucus in the House of Delegates was put in a place where they couldn't win every vote. It used to never be a question. Both of these delegates served under the Republican, not the super majority, but the big majority. And, one of the delegates that was elected in 2017 one time said to everybody, she said, I don't understand how those of you who were here before us did it, because you go in and you'd go in the chamber, and when you're a 66-34 majority, a bill would come up that does something awful. You and a couple of colleagues would stand up, make an impassioned speech on why we should vote no, we have to do this, and maybe you'd get 1 or 2 Republicans to vote with you. And even then, they were just doing it because they were in competitive districts and they were trying to fake out people back home. And you'd lose that vote by a significant margin, and it was not good. But in 2018 and 2019, the Republicans had to work a little bit, and there was a thought that maybe we could get something through. Maybe the Republicans would see, hey, Democrats are about to take over. Maybe we should do a redistricting commission, actually get the power away from the legislature. Those of us who thought that were a little too optimistic, because what ended up happening was Constitutional Amendment 1, which keeps the power with the elected officials and actually gives superpowers to those 4 people who get to choose and the 8 legislators who really get to run the commission. So you had a conference committee come back late. You had a lot of talking back and forth. There was, in 2019, there was some dissension in the House, and it largely, I think it was 10 or 11 members of the Black Caucus, and I think maybe 1 member not of the Black Caucus who voted no. And obviously a lot of people regret their yes votes on that one. But the way it was posed to them was, if you vote no on this, you're voting for gerrymandering. You have to vote yes, because this is reform. And very rushed, very late, it passed. And as people really started looking into it more, then they started seeing all the flaws. Then they started seeing all the problems. So it came up again in 2020. We have new Democratic majorities. The Senate still passed it, again, largely because of disagreements about how the process should be run. And the House passed it because 9 Democrats voted for it. The rest of the Democratic caucus voted against it, but there were still just enough Democrats to go over to pass it. And I think this is the point where I should probably let Lashrecse take over, because she does a much better job going from here.
I will, no, Trevor, you did a beautiful job. And I only have a few additional comments because I really consider this to be probably one of the more emotional issues for me to discuss, especially when I look back. But here's what I will say. You know, as legislators, we are imperfect, right? We do the best we can with the information that we have at the time. And when you think about the context of 2019 and heading into your reelection, there was a great, and this is just what I have been told, there was a great deal of fear that when Democrats had the opportunity, they failed to act on redistricting reform. And the pressure that they would receive as a result of that in their districts. However, for me, it was very much different. And I can say with confidence, and for my colleagues in the Black Caucus, it was very much different in that this literally is about, we have worked this hard to get the scraps of representation that we have and of policies that support Black and Brown communities that we have. We can't afford to pander, you know, a voting base at the risk of isolating the future of our representation. And so it was hard. And if you can imagine waving a red flag, pleading out to your colleagues that this isn't a good move, and for that to fall on deaf ears, it was really painstaking. But what we saw in 2019 moving into 2020 is the same thing we're seeing now. We stood up and we pled with folks, and they weren't with us then. But as Trevor said, as we were in 2020, and you saw all but 9 Democratic members come along and vote with us, it's the same thing that we're seeing now among our voters. They thought, or they think this is what they want. But as soon as they learn more, as soon as you explain more, and they understand more about the mechanics of the amendments, they come along with us and they fight to get true redistricting reform by voting no.
So I voted for the amendment in 2019. I'm not proud of that, but my record is there, and I want to tell you why I did. Partly you have to understand the time pressure we were under. The vast majority of bills go through committee, then they go to the floor, we argue them in subcommittee, and then we argue them again in full committee, then we argue them again on the floor, and then they go to the Senate, and they're argued in committee, and then they're argued on the floor. And so we have a long time to look at each of these things, to make amendments. There are amendments made all along the way to craft really good legislation. This one didn't go through the ordinary process, at all. In fact, there were really good bills to do what all of us want to do, independent, nonpartisan citizens commission. I was with One Virginia 2021 putting forth that in 2019. Republicans killed all those, like they always did, like they did for decades before. You know, it was Mark Cole's subcommittee. He was the chair of the Privileges and Elections subcommittee. or full committee that would kill them all. And so they killed them all. I thought this one was dead. This was Mark Cole's, the original draft of this amendment was that Republicans decide all the districts. That's this amendment you're voting on. The original draft was Republicans decide all the districts. Majority party decides all the districts. And interesting, at that time, all Republicans voted for it and all the Democrats voted against it. So this passed the bare 51 Republican majority, something that we all knew we were going to vote no on. And then in the Senate, you've got some people in the Senate, Democrats, who frankly gerrymandered the Senate back in 2011. The Democrats did it. And George Barker's proposal was this half legislature, half citizen proposal, right? Which we knew, wasn't going to go anywhere in the House. So Mark Cole passes his, George Barker passes his, they go into conference. And on the last day of session, that Saturday, that day when we're all ready to go out, we've worked really hard, it's been a long session, we're ready to go home, boom, bingo, here it is, vote on it. And we're like, well, wait, what does it say? We don't have much time. We have about 20 minutes. Take a look, see what you think. I remember looking at that and saying, wait, the Supreme Court, wait, where did that come from? That, no one ever talked about that. They're chosen by the legislature. And I remember telling a friend of mine in the conference committee, go back and get that out of there. And he said, okay, Mark, I'm gonna try. And he runs out and he comes back with his hang-dog look and says, Mark, Republicans will not. They want that in there. They refuse to pass anything without that in there. It's this or nothing. And I'm like, this doesn't look very good. And he said, look, vote for it. You'll have a whole year to look at it. Maybe you'll find a way to fix it. You know, you're good at fixing things. Maybe there's a way to fix it. You'll have a whole year. The first vote doesn't count because unlike legislation where it's your vote and it counts, you'll get a whole year. We get a second chance at this apple. Take a look at it. You can vote for it to say that you support reform, but then when we get to the actual mechanics of it, you can vote no. So I actually, going into that vote, and I heard Lashrecse, I did not know which way I was going to vote. Finally, I pushed the yes, but I wrote an email to my constituents that same weekend and said, now, even though I voted for it, that doesn't mean I support it. It means I support the idea, but I'm not sure this is the right way to do it. And I'm inclined to vote against it next year unless we fix it. But that's my personal story. And then I had time to look at it. And the more I looked at it, the more I hated it, more and more and more. So they snuck one past us, to be honest with you. And what's really sad is having snuck it past us once, there are some legislators that say, well, I already voted for it, I got to vote for it again. You know, I think when I make a mistake as a legislator, the worst thing to do is to say, well, I made the mistake, I have to make the same mistake again. I think you come clean, you say, I was wrong, I shouldn't have done it. I know more now than I did then. And so since then, I've been really loud in my opposition to my first vote. But that's my personal story and hopefully gives you some context as to why some others are still supporting this. But most of us aren't.
I know you're not talking about my senator, certainly not the majority leader. So what are Delegate Aird, I guess this could be posed to you since you mentioned the protections. What should have been in the amendment? Of course, we prohibited in the law political or racial gerrymandering, but that's only part of it. What else should have been in the amendment, and what will be in the amendment that's offered after this one fails?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. And I think, I tried to make this point earlier in that if it's not explicitly spelled out, if you can't point to it, then it's not there and it doesn't matter. And so it's really simple. We need to explicitly state the prohibition against gerrymandering. Let's just pick up 1256 and drop it in there. And we need to explicitly provide language around, well, I should say this in two different ways. If we're talking about this amendment specifically, we really should prescribe who can be appointed to this commission, but that's not really what I want. What I really want is an independent commission that's free of legislators so that we are not even trying to prescribe the citizen members, right? And so I think the future of an amendment should include really explicit language around that process. And I think the protections that we have in 1255 should be lifted and dropped into anything in the future that really prohibits racial, political, and prison gerrymandering. And then I'll also say, there's a reference to the Voting Rights Act and the 14th Amendment. And I think that anything in the future, it should not just reference what we call it, what's stating the obvious, basically. We should really spell out those protections.
Remember, the US Supreme Court, which really scares me right now, already has, frankly, eviscerated the Voting Rights Act. The reason why Ruth Bader Ginsburg is called the notorious RBG is because how angry she was at the Shelby v. Holder case, when they basically took the Voting Rights Act, which had protected particularly Black Americans for decades. I mean, that's what allowed Blacks to vote. That's what ended, the heart of what ended Jim Crow was the Voting Rights Act. And, the US Supreme Court said, racism's over. We don't need it anymore. To which Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, that's kind of like saying that if you're under an umbrella in a rainstorm and you're not getting wet, you don't need the umbrella anymore. I fear they're going to go worse. I really do. I mean, they just allowed poll taxes in Florida. Poll taxes, right? It's specifically prohibited in the US Constitution, and they're allowing poll taxes in Florida. In Georgia, I'm confident Stacey Abrams was a legitimately elected governor of Georgia, except they just removed 300,000 Blacks from the voting rolls in Georgia. Brian Kemp, the Secretary of State, did it for his own election. This is right now, this isn't 1963. Right? This is 2020 under this Supreme Court, which is going to get worse. So this idea that we can rely on, federal law to protect us, no, we can't. No, we can't at all. We need those explicit protections in the Virginia Constitution so that if God knows what happens at the federal level, we are still protected.
The thing I've heard that I don't understand, because I guess I'm too young, is some reference to 16.
You're 16, all right. So you're gonna vote in 2022. All right.
I'm voting 2021.
Oh, good. Then it really matters. Great.
I've heard some reference to an amendment on right to work. Can someone explain that, what that was?
So that was a constitutional amendment that was on the ballot in 2018, Trevor, I think. This was an amendment, basically an anti-union amendment. And everyone thought it was going to pass because everyone thought, well, Republicans are the majority and Virginians hate unions. And lo and behold, it didn't, and surprised a lot of people. I think a lot of people think this is going to pass, and I don't know whether it will or won't. We'll know in a month. But people assumed, people hate unions and people hate gerrymandering, this sort of very simplistic idea. And what we found is that Virginians are not always rushing to amend their constitution, particularly when something is confusing or complex. And I can go into that, but that's not what this discussion's about. But basically it has to do with union dues and payment and all that. But turned out, no, it wasn't. We rejected that amendment in 2018. And that's why I actually have some hope here, because I hope that not just for Democrats, independents, Republicans, people who don't understand this convoluted thing, and it is convoluted, will just say, yeah, I'm not so sure about putting that permanently in our Constitution. And frankly, for independents, if you have friends who are independents, obviously the Democrat Party says vote no. Tell all your Democratic friends, vote no. But independents, they're completely excluded from the commission, right? None. I mean, four party leaders, 1/3 of Virginians are independent or third party. And there are lots of people who are moderate and in the middle. They get no representation. Imagine an independent wins a seat. Well, they'll quickly be carved apart in the redistricting. We've had independents in Virginia, the Virginia General Assembly. In fact, more years than not, we've had independents, not this year. But so there are real reasons, not just if you're a Democrat, to oppose this. Independents should oppose it as well. And frankly, good government Republicans should oppose this as well, because any good government person believes that voters should choose their legislators and not have legislators choose the voters.
And I think also what this reminds me of is that we can do it. There is this fear that we cannot overcome a constitutional amendment on a ballot, it's all but going to happen. That's just not true. When we get the word out, when we talk to our voters and we really inform our voters, they will make the right decision. And we still have time to do that work. It's less than 30 days now, right? But there is still time to do that work. We have had record number of individuals request to vote by absentee. And Trevor will talk about what Fair Districts is doing to make sure we are getting to those people. But there is still a record number of people that will show up on November 3rd to vote in person, which means we still have time to get the word out, to get our message out, and not take it for granted, and make sure our friends, family, and neighbors are aware.
Matt, you live in Fairfax County? Okay. There's a wonderful effort in Fairfax County, Arlington County, and the city of Alexandria, and I've been involved in all three, and Lashrecse can tell you what she's doing in her neighborhood. But there's a no on one Alexandria, no on one Arlington, but the no on one Fairfax really needs people like you, Matt, and others on this call, because I'll tell you what happens. I've been a precinct captain in Alexandria for, I don't know, a long time. I've lived in Alexandria 20 years, and I was a precinct captain early on. I've handed out those sample ballots more election days than I can count. And you hand them out and most people smile and most of them take one, but unless there's a local election on the ballot, they're just doing it out of courtesy. They know who they're voting for. They're a Democrat, they're voting for the Democrats. If they're Republican, they're voting for the Republicans. Like I said, there's some local offices sometimes, but 99% of the time, they're just taking it to be nice. And yet we stand out there in the rain, we do that. You actually could have more power standing outside in Fairfax County in the next 30 days than possibly the rest of your life. I know that I can change 50 to 100 votes in a 2-hour shift, where normally if I changed one vote, I was happy, because people walk in, they don't even know what's on the ballot. They're out there to vote for Biden, to get rid of Trump. That's why they're there. And they're going to vote a straight Democratic Party ticket. And sometimes you'll say, you want a Democratic sample ballot? They say, no, I know who I'm voting for. And they say, are you voting no on one? And they say, what? And you say Constitutional Amendment 1. Are you voting no? The Democrat Party wants you to vote no on 1. And they say, what's that? And then you have a conversation. And 60% of the time, you just say the Democrat Party wants you to vote no on 1. They say, okay, boom, you got their vote. Easiest conversation ever. About 20% of the time, they ask you the details. And Matt, you know them well. You tell them what you told them. Boom, you got their vote. 20% of the time, they're Republican. And when they probably aren't talking to you. But if they do talk to you, you explain the reasons why even Republicans should oppose this. But my point is, you could have more impact, all of you, everyone in this room and all your friends and everyone watching this video, you could have more impact at the polls in this one election than probably the next 20 elections, because people don't know what's on the ballot. And really, they can be changed. You're not going to convince, I'm sorry, a Trump voter to vote for Biden. You're just right. Not going to do that. We wish we could. We want to, why can't you? But they won't listen to us. But people will listen on this amendment, because they don't have these firm choices. And the clearest example is they asked a poll a few months ago, how many support this amendment? And people were like, I don't really know what's in it, but okay. And 72% supported this amendment. They took a poll just a week ago. It's down to 48%. That's a massive drop. And they've got millions of dollars. And all we have is voices like yours. That's all we have. People going to the polls and telling people. And yet our voices, because we have the better argument, is beating out millions of dollars from these Enron billionaires, and like the Republicans who gerrymandered North Carolina just gave a bunch of money to their campaign. We're doing it amazingly with this grassroots effort. And that's why I really appeal to you, Matt, and you, Adrian, all of you on this call, to go out to the polls. It's actually really fun, because you actually change people's minds. It's more fun than ordinarily. And to get all your friends involved. And here's the thing, you're 16, you can't cast a ballot, but if you change 50 votes, it's like you cast 50 ballots legally. Y'all can make the difference in defeating this thing. It's really exciting, and we really need you, because I can tell you at Fairfax right now, they've got most slots covered. They don't have every slot covered for every day. And then they're going to go out to all these satellite offices. We need bodies. We need woman power, manpower. We need people out there, and y'all really can make this difference.
And although I'm a young Dem, still, I wouldn't be the mom in the room if I didn't say, and do so safely, right? There's a way to do, but also do so safely.
Of course.
Yeah, so how has the Vote No on One campaign been impacted by COVID? And so the Fairfax Democrats decided that they're not going to do like paper, they're not going to hand out paper ballots. They have like big signs outside
Yeah,
We
I
have
mean,
big
outside the
signs,
government center.
but some people are taking paper. You wear gloves. People are taking paper. In Arlington, they're taking the paper. We have the signs too, but I just know from the people in the field, most people are taking the paper. I would
What
just wear
I
gloves.
say is, as a affinity group of the state Democratic Party, if the Virginia Young Democrats Teen Caucus wanted their own sample ballot to give out, we could more than arrange that and help you get what you need to support your efforts at your local registrar's office.
I think
Great.
one thing you're hitting on there, Matt, and everybody's already talked about it a little, but just to really drive it home, the thing that COVID has done, though, is it's done a few things. One, obviously, it's limited our door-to-door and our person-to-person contact, but it's also driven a lot of people out to vote early. And that's why the Yes campaign has already spent over $2 million. And they're probably going to spend another 2 or 3 million before the election is done. The reason they're doing that is because they have a simple message. It's a lie, but it's a simple message. And that is, vote yes on one, it'll end gerrymandering. And so what I would encourage you to do when you're talking to people, if they tell you they're going to vote yes on one of the things you can do, and you have to do it nicely, you can't do it snarky and you can't be whatever about it. You have to say, what does Amendment 1 do? Because if they tell you it ends gerrymandering, you can tell them, no, it doesn't. Let me tell you what it really does. And then once they get that more information, that actual detail on it, most of them come around to no. That's why you see Amendment 1 falling in the polls. That's why we got 4 emails in one day the other day of people saying, oh my gosh, I voted yes because I read the ballot language and it looks like something I'd support. But now that I've read about it, I wish I could have voted no. I messed up. What do I do? And I say, like, please call everybody else you know and tell them not to mess up as well. Because that's the problem. The Yes campaign has a massive media budget that we don't have. We are doing some, especially digital, but we just don't have their budget. And so we've got to make sure that we're reaching people as much as we can. And that's why if you follow our Twitter, you see us constantly saying, can you call 4 friends or family members today? You know, can you reach out to people in your network today? Because the way we're going to defeat this thing is a grassroots movement and talking to people one-on-one and educating them about what Amendment 1 actually does.
So I'm about to send out a massive no on one amendment email. Actually, if any of y'all, Matt, I'll add you, but if you'll add to my newsletter, mark it at markfordelegate.com, I'll add you. You can add yourself, markfordelegate.com, MARKFOR delegate.com. But the reason I'm telling you this is not to get more newsletter, it's to get you to share it with every single Virginian you know. You're amazed, you send out 100 of those, or 200, all of you, you got 1,000 people you know in Virginia on your email list. I know y'all, each of you do. And you post it on Facebook. You got to remember, y'all are well informed. 80% of Virginians don't even know what's on the ballot. It gives you incredible power as an influence maker. And it's great because it's a great way to show that people power can actually beat money power. And so, you know, we'll give you all the talking points you need. You can frame it your own way. It's your message. But yeah, we really, really need your help.
And I will go a bit further and say that just from this conversation alone, it's been made clear to me that you really understand this issue. And the one thing that correlates directly with voting is authenticity. People want you to be real with them, and they can feel when you're being real and when you are not. And so as young Democrats, there is a way for you to frame this to your peers, but then also to your parents and, you know, the people that you know, in a very real way that does not feel like someone's trying to sell them something. And 9 times out of 10, when people feel that authenticity, especially when they trust you and they know that you have no reason to mislead them, that is the most persuasive tactic ever. And it's not really a tactic, it just is what it is. And so we're not asking you to get technical with people and to try and, restate all of the confusing parts of this amendment. Just be real with people and have a conversation with them like we've done here today.
One thing we found is that the Yes campaign sends out a bunch of people with their talking points, and they really don't understand the amendment. And so they come there and someone asks them a question and they look down their talking point list and they're like talking point 3, and then they read it out, and then someone asks them a technical question. They're like talking point 3, repeat themselves. And what we've had out there is dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, including some older, people in the community who've been there a long time, and to very young people, but folks who know you, because a lot of these people even, they're from out of state, they're not necessarily even from the community, and they're like, me, I wouldn't lead you. People trust people they know, and that's why when you write your friends and your family, as Lashrecse said, they're going to listen to you. And that's the power you have, because they're mostly just the talking point people. And one thing I've found is useful is when people actually, what do you mean it doesn't ban gerrymandering? Sure it does. You have a copy of the amendment and you say, show me where. They're like, well, I don't know where. I'm like, okay, ask the Yes people to show you where. They can't, because it doesn't. It just doesn't. Sometimes I say, what paragraph is it in? Why, what paragraph is it in? If it doesn't, what paragraph is it in? And then it makes them look at the actual amendment, not just the, the sort of confusing and frankly misleading information on the ballot, the actual amendment. And they're like, wait, the party leaders choose people through judges? I'm like, you're like, yeah, Supreme Court, look at that too. So, yeah, I mean, usually you don't have to go into those weeds, but if people want to go there, you're like, show me where. Because if it ain't in there, it ain't in there. It's that simple. And they can't point to it because it's not there.
Great. If anyone else has questions, feel free to ask.
Yeah, so this is kind of a tough question, but if you were if you were talking to someone, outside of a polling station, and you wanted to convince them to vote no on Amendment 1, what would you say to them? Like, because you have like 30 seconds, right? And it's kind of complicated. So like, what would you say to them? Like, kind of like, basically.
It's very simple. Voters should be choosing their legislators. Legislators should not be choosing their voters. Full stop, period.
Adrian, where do you live?
I go to the same school as Matt. I live in Fairfax.
Fairfax County. So in
Yeah.
Fairfax County, you have the advantage of knowing most of the people there are Democrats. So what I would do is say, would you like a Democratic sample ballot? And if they say yes, 95% of the time they're a Democrat or a Democrat leading independent, because most Republicans will say no, thank you, right? Once you know they're a Democrat, you should say the Democratic Party has asked you to vote no on 1. And then I stop. And 60% of people, you've won that. You've won that exchange. And the fair match people, the yes people can say all they want. You said the Democratic Party said no, and you may point to the sign, you get in the sample ballot. You've won that exchange. Now, if they push back further, then you go to what Lashrecse said. If they're Republican or independent, you go to what Lashrecse said. But in Fairfax County, just knowing the Democratic Party is behind it, that's enough for the majority of people.
And if you're in a little more conservative area of Virginia, like I am, then you go with more what Delegate Aird said, which is that the people should be picking the politicians, not the other way around. Point to the politicians controlling it. That's the message that works best with them.
Yeah, I have a bit of a mixed bag. I've got rural, suburban, and urban. And so it gets pretty spicy in these conversations.
Little bit of everything in your district.
I'm a proud, solid blue Virginia. I just say Democratic Party and boom, I win. It's a lot easier for me.
I'm in Hanover County and everybody knows what that means.
Well, we want you all to be able to get back your Sunday and to be able to now quickly pivot to doing some of this work to encourage people to vote no on one. But I'm sure Trevor will tell you more, but you can visit, fairdistricts.com and quickly pull up our talking points, quickly pull up the reasons to oppose, find out what's
Virginia.com. Sorry.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
You just said
In the
fairdistricts.com.
chat.
Fairdistrictsva.com.
Districtsva.com.
Sorry, go ahead.
Thank you so much. To find out, if you're, in front of someone, you've lost your train of thought, you can get that information there. If people want to directly get involved, Trevor will tell you more about that. But also know that Delegate Levine and I mean, we're both on social. If you need help at any moment, if you need additional information at any moment, you can reach out to us, and we're absolutely going to be there to support you.
Okay, great. Delegate Levine, I guess, would be the best person to answer this since you're up here in the 8th district with me. Congressman Don Beyer supports the amendment. And it's so ironic since he has that bill that would require every state to have redistricting commissions. And I think it would require, the same bill would require ranked choice voting. And I kind of read that section of his bill. It's so more in depth. There are so many more requirements against racial gerrymandering, political gerrymandering, the composition of the committee, of the commission. How do we go against party leaders like that?
It's a good question. And I've had a long conversation with Don about this. Depending on who you talk to, you can give as much detail as you want to give. I would say that when it comes to federal legislation, I trust my member of Congress. And when it comes to state legislation, I trust my delegate. I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of the CARES Act. I think it's a good thing. It sounds like a really good thing to me. But you ask me what's on page 143, paragraph G of it, I got no idea. It's not my job to review federal legislation. It's not Don's job to review this. And I think you'll find that Don Beyer strongly supports gerrymandering reform, but isn't necessarily in tune with what this specific reform does. And I say that with kindness. He's a friend of mine, and I've worked with him on a lot of issues. And I think he's trying to look at doing it on a national level, and he's doing a good job there. And I think he wants to say that Virginia's leading the way. So he wants the political thing of we've done something, but the devil's in the details. The details matter. And, if Don Beyer said, Mark, I want this federal reform well, but there's a poison pill in it that you haven't noticed, I'd be like, what do you mean? Again, you can ask him yourself. You can talk to him yourself. I think the other thing that Don Beyer has said to me, and he said publicly, so I'm not talking out of school, is that he was around the Democratic Party. He was in the State House. He was lieutenant governor in 1991 when they had that redistricting, and Democrats were in charge. And Democrats filibustered gerrymandered in 1991. And he remembers that. And I think there's this cynical view that, frankly, many newspaper editorials have, that the party in power will always gerrymander. And they'll always do it, and there's nothing you can do about it. And so you've just got to, and all I can say is we're not our parents' Democratic Party. The Democratic Party in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, some of that was the leftover of the Byrd machine, the segregationist Byrd machine. That was the Democratic Party, right? They were the massive resistance party. And then you got a few liberals that still remain today, people like Ken Plum and Vivian Watts, but they were the minority within the Democratic Party. The leadership was the old school. And that's the school that Don Beyer remembers 30 years ago when he was in that Democratic majority. We aren't them. In fact, I would argue that even some of the supporters today in the Senate are from that old school line of thinking. But people like Lashrecse and me, we came in 2015. And you'd think we're pretty new, right? We've only been here 5 years. You know what? The majority of the House of Delegates is junior to us. We're the senior members, Lashrecse and I, of today's Democratic Party. We're in the top half. That's crazy, but it tells you that it's a very, very different group of people. I don't know if the Democratic Party 10 years ago would have voted to ban gerrymander if they're in the majority. I don't know. It's an interesting hypothetical question, but I know what we've done today. And so, you know, let that cynicism lie. That's not today's Democratic Party. The reformers are in charge. True progressives are in charge. And
Mark, I would say that's not debatable. That's a whole fact. Delegate Levine is being politically correct, but the truth of the matter is what he is stating is actual facts. And I would just charge a little differently here. I don't think it's your responsibility. I don't think it's my responsibility to go against party leaders and or to fight, you know, older members, no disrespect to them, or, you know, federal members. I don't think that's my job. My job and your job, in my opinion, is to take this to the voters. Because not only is the Democratic elected legislators a very different group of people, so are the Democratic voters. We are talking about a different type of Virginia. And I think we can win this argument and win this fight, taking our fight to the voters.
Okay, well, unless there are any other questions.
And Congressman Bobby Scott and Congressman Don McEachin are on our side.
Yeah. Well, thanks again so much for coming. Unless anyone has any questions, we can end it there.
I want to make a request if there aren't any questions. If there are folks who are comfortable turning on their cameras, I would love to get like a group shot really quickly to really highlight the fact that our young Democratic Teen Caucus members, they are actively involved with trying to get people to vote no. They're taking an active role in their governing process in preparation for the November election. And I am just so grateful that you all even, you know, wanted to have this conversation, that you wanted to understand it, and that you have taken time out of your busy schedules to do this. And so if I can, I'm gonna take a great grand screenshot and I'm gonna ask if you can just give me a beautiful smile in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Got it. Thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. Really.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.